Okay, in this video we're going to continue on and we're going to actually set up our enhanced input component. So we now have our data here that we can utilize, and basically the goal is we're going to pass this data into our bind function in our enhanced input component, and it is going to bind it to whatever function we want to, well, have. So we're basically going to have four different parameters. First one's going to be the data asset because we need to iterate over the array of inputs that we set up. We need to have the class at which we want to make the callbacks for. So on pressed, on released, for example. And we need to know the functions that we want to pass in. So we're going to have four total parameters. So pressed and released, the data asset, and the object. So let's go ahead and create our function. So we're going to do void bind ability inputs. And the first one's going to be that data asset. So the U input ability system data asset, and we will forward declare it up here. So let's call this one data. Well, we'll just do input data asset. Okay. Next up is we need the object. So we're also going to need the function. So this is where templates are going to be quite useful. So we're going to go ahead and create a new template. Or we're going to mark this as a template, sorry. And we need to have the class at which we are going to utilize. So for example, in this case, we're going to be utilizing this class here. So if you see this reference here as to object, that's what it is. So if we view the bind action function, you can see it is a template. So it uses the user class, and user class is linked to object. And then we have, well, in this case, it has variadic arguments. We're not going to be using that, but this is basically kind of what we are doing. So we are going to have a user class. So class name, user class. Wait. Oh, sorry, class. I got that confused with type name. Sorry. So we have our user class, and now we have our two functions. So you can add a third if you want to have held in here, but we're just going to do two. So we're going to do type name just to keep it a little bit different. So we're going to have, this is going to be our pressed function. And we're just going to name it pressed function, and we're going to have another, which is going to be the released function. Actually, let's name this to pressed, not pressed function. And these are going to be our following inputs. So we're going to have our user class, call it object to kind of keep it consistent with Unreal. Then we're going to have our pressed function, and we're going to call this one pressed function callback. And we're going to have the exact same thing for our released function. So we're going to have released function callback, like so. Now we can go ahead and generate the definition. We're just going to put it, because it is a template, inside of the header file as well. So what we need to do is we have our input data asset. So we need to iterate over the ability inputs array. And for each input ability, we need to bind that action to these callbacks. So our pressed and released. So we're going to go ahead and iterate. So let's do a for loop, and the type was F ability input action. And we're going to do it by reference, and we're going to call this one input action. Actually, let's do ability input action. And we need to include this data asset rather than forward declare it, because we are utilizing the type that we defined or we declared inside of it. So instead of forward declaring, we are going to include data assets, input ability system data asset. Okay, and what we're going to iterate through is going to be the input data asset, and I press my caps lock. Yep. That was the ability inputs. So we have that set up, and now we want to actually utilize the bind action function provided by the enhanced input. So we're going to do bind action, and what do we want to bind? Well, we need the action, which is stored inside of here. So ability input action. We need the trigger type. So this is going to be our pressed and released. So the started will act as our pressed and the completed will act as our released. So E trigger type started. We need the object, which if you remember is the object we pass in. And then we need in our case, this is going to be our function. So this is going to be our pressed function callback. And we want to pass a parameter to it. So we can add one more, which is going to be our gameplay tag for the input. So we can do our ability input action, input tag, just like so. And this will handle binding up. So basically, anytime our input action is pressed, such as jump, it is going to call whatever function we bind in here and pass in the input tag. So we can copy and paste this, and we're going to have another one for completed. Now in this case, I don't want to go through and check really anything, more so because if it fails, I want to know that it failed. So rather than, having an if input data asset's valid, I'd rather have it in a check. So we're going to do a check, input data asset, and if it fails, we're just going to do input data asset invalid. And that'll throw us into, kind of allow us to, I guess, more easily know what actually failed rather than, well, something else. And we should be able to make this a constant just to kind of indicate that we're only really reading from this data. We're not actually going to be doing anything else with it. And what is the U for? No, I don't want to do any of that. All right. So we are now pretty much set up and good to go. The only thing we need to do is actually, well, use it. So we're going to set up a quick little data asset here in our character. So I'll just do it before or below the last action, make a new section, or not a new section, but a new space. And we're going to do the T object pointer to our data asset. So the U input ability, and I just realized we did not actually include this as a module. So I'm going to instead call the video here because we are going on about 8 minutes and I'm trying to keep these very short and very individual. But in the next video, we're going to have that set up. We're going to actually utilize our bind ability inputs function, and we're going to test it and confirm that it does work. So I will see you then.